All right, hey gang, this is Jimmy coming to you from the Cowtown compound with Facts Not Fiction. We're really excited today. We're going to talk to Stan Morris, who has Northeast Arkansas reports out of Jonesboro. Stan is a really good investigative journalist, and he's going to tell us about something that's gone under the radar basically across the state. It's about the death of Marshall Ray Price in the Greene County Jail back in December. This has got shades of Lonoke County Sheriff John Staley all over it in the way this happened, and the fact that they're really trying to keep information from the public, not just the public, but to the family. So we're gonna let Stan tell us. He got on this and started digging in like nobody else has, and he's basically been a thorn in the side to this to the sheriff's department down there because he's going to tell you what they don't want you to know. And so we're going to get Stan to start. Stan, you there, buddy?
I am, Jimmy. Appreciate you for having me on today.
Yeah, appreciate you coming. This story is tragic and horrific, and no shock that Little Rock news organizations have really not done anything about it. They've kind of gone off a tangent on their own agenda. So I really appreciate you and Northeast Arkansas Reports, bringing this out to the public for them to know. Can you take us back to the very beginning of this whole story?
Yeah, because it actually began with a press release. Honestly, I hadn't followed the story until the conviction happened in November. And what happened was on November 17th, I published a press release that had come out from the prosecutor's office. The man was found in drug trafficking. And of course, a drug trafficking conviction is usually a larger sentence, and he was sentenced to a decade in prison. And so once we opened the release and we published it, we found that it was a bit unusual because most drug trafficking releases are not for kratom. But this was an arrest for the herb known as kratom, which is illegal here in the state of Arkansas. And there's a lot that could be discussed about that law that was passed, but basically a single doctor testified or made statements to the effect that the legislature then decided that they would make it a felony. And so Marshall Ray Price went to Mr. T's at Riverside, which a lot of people know that's at the Missouri state line with Arkansas here in Northeast Arkansas. And at a gas station, he finds kratom.
Now, Stan, let me ask you this for those of us that aren't as up to date on this. Tell us about kratom before. Tell us what kratom is and what kind of drug it is.
Well, I don't have a lot of experience or any with it personally, but what I can tell you from my research and knowledge is it's basically an herb or a tea leaf that people use. I think they often mix it into a tea. There's probably other ways to consume it. And it's a mild euphoric feeling, a mild high. Some people say, a lot of people say, I worked with a gentleman that, and I won't mention his name, but he was a high-level executive that drank a kratom tea every morning. And that's the first time I had heard of it. So I had, when I came back, into this story, and I see somebody's convicted of a felony for it, it was, a bit of a surprise for me. And, without getting into the judgment of everything myself, it's an overreach to classify this as a felony. I mean, I'm not, getting into the debate about the war on drugs today, but so it was not, it wasn't the typical release. It wasn't a typical case, and it did catch my eye. But we just published the release that he had been sentenced to 10 years in prison.
Sure. And I'm sorry, I cut you off there to find out about kratom, but you were talking about where he was arrested at. He went to the state line to buy this. Is that correct?
Yeah, he had driven to the Missouri state line to purchase this, and once he came back into Arkansas, I don't know the exact mile marker, but he, apparently was stopped. It was a traffic stop, Greene County on May 5th, 2021, and the authorities said consented to a search of the vehicle, and authorities said they found a large amount of kratom inside of this vehicle. So the prosecutors charged him with drug trafficking. And from what the family says, the jury was not allowed to hear that he bought the substances at a gas station at the Missouri state line. That was, the judge ordered that detail not to be shared. So he was convicted, and the prosecutor sent out the release to celebrate that conviction. And as a matter of fact, I saw several of them share it on their personal profiles, the prosecutors, deputy prosecutors. And so that was the first we've heard of the case. And then, and again, we're talking about November 17th, right?
Okay.
Of 2022. It was less than a month later that he was dead. And he had not left the custody of the Greene County Jail. Even though he had been convicted, he was awaiting transfer to the Arkansas Department of Corrections. On December 9th is when I published the story. He passed away on December 8th. And his injuries themselves were sustained December 7th. And they were at the jail. He was taken to the hospital, and in the early morning hours of December 8th, pronounced dead in the hospital.
And when you say injuries, Stan, what are we talking about?
So that's where it becomes more graphic, and where we've also learned a lot in just the past couple of days. This is a bit of breaking news for us here to announce on your podcast, because the death certificate was just released as we were reporting this. And the injuries were, according to the medical terminology, blunt force trauma injuries to the torso. Due to those, he sustained internal bleeding. He bled to the degree that it bled out in his stomach cavity in between the lining and the organs, and he died. Hypovolemic shock, I believe is the term, with hemoperitoneum also. That's medical lingo. To break it down a little bit more simply, when I talked to his daughter, as she explained to me, and I'll pull the story back up because it's just so, it's gruesome, but.
Yeah, it needs to be told, though. The people need to hear the exact nature, even though it's hard to hear, they need to hear it.
According to what the daughter was told, the exact words were that he had a skull fracture, broken ribs, busted spleen, his brain was swelling, and he may have gone into cardiac arrest due to all of the injuries. Obviously, the body can't sustain that type of trauma. He was beaten to death in the jail. There's no way to get around that because you can't inflict blunt force trauma to your own body. It's unimaginable to think that you could, to that degree, where you sustain those injuries and you're able to keep injuring more and more portions of your body. Generally speaking, you break a rib, you're probably done. And yet somehow past that, his skull was fractured, busted spleen, any of those things would be enough to,
We could probably rule out that he jumped off the building, and I think anybody with common sense that is hearing these injuries would say, "Hey, these were not self-inflicted injuries."
No, and there were a lot of initial, like when the story came out, there was an effort to push misinformation, and I don't know where that came from, but we can all suspect. And some were posting, well, I heard he fell out of his bunk bed, or I heard he slipped. That's not conducive with the injuries reported. One of those injuries might have been enough, but that you compound all of them, there's no way that happens from the fall. And what's worse is that's just the initial beginning of it. difficulty for us. We don't have all the records yet to tell you just exactly when he was, how long he was in between the injury and the hospitalization took place. But we know that he was there for at least a period of time for several hours, and possibly more than that, possibly as many as 12 hours or 8 hours. It could have been around that period of time. But that, which we had previously heard from in the family and from sources inside of the jail, lines up with the fact that he did bleed to death internally and had a significant amount of blood, I believe, in his stomach by the time he got to the hospital. So,
Yeah, basically he bled to death inside.
yes, and nobody provided the proper care or treatment to him as he did that. I was told, again, we're getting into some unverified details, but one of the details that had come to us through the jail and through inmates that were in there with him that had spoken to their loved ones that had contacted us, that he was taken to the infirmary or the medical wing for care multiple times during this. So if that would indicate he went there and left, for some reason they didn't see him as serious enough to need to then immediately go to the hospital. But that, details like that we're still clearing up with records requests and stuff. The difficulty is, we know he was in jail. We know that's where he sustained these horrible injuries. And it's hard to imagine it wasn't from a beating. And we know he was there for so long that he bled to death. And when he was finally taken to the hospital, there was nothing they could do, and he was pronounced dead on the early morning, December 8th. And strangely enough, and we can go into this more in a bit, but strangely enough, the jail records were updated when they took him to the hospital to show he had been released from custody. So.
Yeah, it's pretty uncaring, and I think it's a shame the way they do that. That when there's a death, that they, that they just simply put on the jail reports and everything that the inmate was released, and that's always heartless to a family. That's always heartless to a family to hear that their loved one who actually died in the facility is put down on paper as released. And
it makes it even harder when the family reads that on the local television station,
right,
as being reported as fact, and that's what happened here.
That's what KAIT did, right?
Yes, sir.
KAIT Channel 8, is that correct?
That's correct. You would find their news brand is Region 8 News,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's where you would find them online. And I'm not trying to be nasty toward them, because journalism is hard, and I know that. But
yeah, but when you're reporting bullshit instead of facts, it's that's one thing I get fired up about. And they actually reported that he was released. They're reporting. I'll just call it what it is. Is their reporting on this is not been good at all. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, because I appreciate that you're trying to bring the facts out no matter what they are, and you're trying to do factual reporting. So that's what that's the reason I wanted to talk to you about this. Let me ask you this: do we know if his heart stopped at the jail, and if they tried to perform any CPR, life-saving technique, or anything like that, or do we think that they had transported him while he was still alive?
that is, I think I would be afraid to speculate on that, because the death certificate does not have a specific exact time of death.
Mm-hmm.
They made the pronouncement at the hospital, but that may only mean that they didn't pronounce him dead at the jail. That may literally only mean that.
Right.
So, uh, you know, the one thing I know, and I know that she was told the cardiac arrest element, which may very well, you know, I'm sure his heart did stop, but the injuries at the jail, just the you know the medical terminology for the internal bleeding, that had to take some period of time. So he was alive at least for a period after the injuries, when his blood was still pumping, but his organs were torn open, and it was pumping out into the lining of his body. So
Which
we
which we can say, and I know you've done the research on it, and I've done enough research to know that without question, I think it's safe to say that Mr. Price died a very painful death.
Yeah, that's what makes it hard. When I'm talking to the daughter yesterday on the phone, as she is telling me her feelings on this, and she's going through the injuries, she can't even read them off without crying, because she knows that she's reading a what she had worried and dreaded to fear was true, which is that her father suffered to death, but he did, and it's hard. That's the reason that I'm anchored to this case and wants to do what I can to help advance or lead to justice in it, or some kind of resolution for the family. It's the family. It's listening to the tears and listening to the grieving of a daughter that was texting her dad that she was sad that was going away, but she was hopeful that she was going to get to see him again, and he never will again, because he bought a lease basically at a gas station. That makes it really hard for them, because if there was a conviction based on a crime of the victim, or hell, even a narcotic that has a record of destroying lives, right?
Right.
There are those that we could all agree that are probably best not in the community. This was not that. This was a man that had come off of, from what I'm told, an opioid addiction, that had found relief from that, and relief from drugs that were actually the kind we're talking about, through this. And I'm not advocating for kratom, because I don't know anything about it except what I've read. What I'm advocating for is that there's a reason to what we're doing, and if we're jailing people, there has to be some logic to that. And in this case, it's bizarre, because it doesn't seem like he actually was trafficking drugs, not to mention it doesn't seem like that he had any ill intent with using them. It just looks like it was a guy that was trying to fix himself up and to get better, and maybe not go to a methadone clinic to do it.
Right.
And this took a horrible turn, and then it took an even more nightmarish turn with his death.
Well, I think that what everybody agrees on, there are people incarcerated that are not saints, okay, that are hardened criminals, and then there are people that are incarcerated that are not what I consider to be hardened criminals, but drug addicts, things of that nature, that are not violent people. They have an addiction, okay, and I'm not defending an addiction at all, but the point I've tried to make in other cases, and that I'm going to make in this case, is it really doesn't matter what Mr. Price was charged with. When you are committed to a detention facility, the sheriff and everyone there takes an oath, an oath to uphold their duty, and their duty is to maintain the care for the inmates. You don't have to like the inmates. You don't have to like what they did. and it's not an easy job. And I want to say real quick that everybody knows that I'm an avid law enforcement supporter, and I support corrections officers as much as anything because it's a very hard job. In a lot of ways, it's harder than being on the street. And we have so many wonderful, wonderful people in law enforcement that go there. But when things like this happen, we have to point it out. But this isn't a representation of all law enforcement. This is simply on the people that this happened with. And I, to me, and I'm not gonna put words in your mouth, but to me, this basically boils down to torture. And I don't want to put you on the spot to say that, Stan, but I've seen it in other cases too with John David Mackey, so I can really understand how the family is just torn apart. How did you first get in touch with the family right after the death? And tell me about the family.
Yeah, so I did first get in touch with them right after the death, and the information about that had come out. It was a situation where I was getting messages from a lot of people in Northeast Arkansas and further out that were telling me that I needed to look into this, and so I contacted Julian Jones, which is one of the children of Marshall Ray Price, and she and I spoke extensively. She told me what she knew, and it was that initial conversation where she told me his injuries as described to her by the pronouncing doctor, the coroner, which is, obviously pre-autopsy, but still.
It's coroner. It's
yeah. And he had, he'd been beat to death in the jail. And she, at that point had only that information and was just crushed. And so, she retained an attorney, and we spoke and started doing our stories. And we've done, several. The first story was informative. The second we did was more of an update that no authorities in Arkansas were providing any status updates to the family or anything. There was no hope that they've gotten from law enforcement that this is something that is being investigated or will be resolved. And so, it was a case where I wanted to try to help not just them to tell their story, but I really just wanted to encourage them, because it sounded like that they were, and reporters often meet people on the worst days of their lives. And, sometimes all we do as reporters is we take the story and we go and publish it. For me, I like to, and this is, I guess, the benefit of me owning the business, so I can get away with devoting hours to helping a family just feel better. Sometimes they just need to talk to somebody, and I want to try to help them. And so I've become close to the family in that regard, and I feel their grief, but I can't begin to understand what that they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think I would lose my mind to try to understand it. But talk about the issues of from the family standpoint of what they're feeling about not getting answers. That's probably been as tough for them as the initial revelation, because since December 7th, when he was taken to the hospital, December 8th when he died, the family has organized multiple demonstrations in front of the jail, protests, if you will. I think the last one was on January 22nd, and you had several dozen people show up out there with signs in support of the family and Marshall Price. It's something that she's had to go to therapy for because of the emotions, she said, of the pain. She says not just mental and emotional, but that has affected her physical health. And it's something that, if you think about it, it's not hard to see, because with that kind of anxiety, she's experienced, she says, anxiety attacks, panic attacks, tremors, migraines, nausea, and she says those are daily occurrences for her now. And And following her on her Facebook profile as a friend of hers, there's almost not a day that goes by that she does not comment or post about her father. She clearly is devastated by this. And, you know, it's just a small snapshot, but it's a picture of how her family as a whole is dealing with this. And it's, you know, it's not well, but nobody could. They are remain the strength that they have found to still champion the effort to find justice for this and to work with the press, to work with anybody. That strength is incredible and it's inspiring to me. But because honestly, I don't think I could keep it together like that she has if my dad had been murdered in police custody.
Sure.
And nobody was answering me.
Sure. What is the family getting in its Sheriff Steve Franks, right?
The sheriff at the time was Steve Franks.
Right.
But he was voted out of office, and so I believe the sheriff there, I'll double check this, is Brad Snyder, I think is his name.
Okay.
So there is a new sheriff there since this has happened.
That's kind of what I wanted to see. What did the family get from Steve Franks as far as response or conciliatory tone versus what they're getting from the new sheriff, or is it the same?
Unfortunately, it's the same, and that's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could tell you. I wish I had a longer answer for you on that I could drive that point home. But they're getting nothing. I don't think they've received this. I mean, I've asked her. She hasn't told me. I don't think they've received a single update from law enforcement since this happened, which is it's hard to. I don't understand that myself.
I get it. Did Steve Franks, former Sheriff Steve Franks, speak with the family at all after this happened, just to give condolences or anything?
In all the interviews that I've done with them and asked them what law enforcement said to them, they have never told me that.
Yeah.
They have never, and so I can't say definitively without asking that specific question, but what I can tell you is I asked what law enforcement said to them, and they told me nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm presuming, based on that information, no, he did not.
Wow. And I know that the Arkansas State Police does a really good job of investigations, and Major Stacy Rhodes is the commander for the state on CID in criminal investigations. And she does a really good job, and her staff does a really good job. One of the frustrating things, though, and I'm going to take up for them, not Steve Franks, but for them on this a little bit, is the sense that in any homicide investigation, to keep from compromising anything, as much as they would like to tell family members, they just are barred from doing so about anything about the case, so to speak. And I know that's frustrating for families, and it's frustrating for the public as well, because they want to know and so I know there's not a lot coming from ASP, but I want to back up and see from your end when you started on this, because we've talked about this, and because I do this too. Tell me about how you started to investigate it with the Sheriff's Department, and what you asked and what roadblocks they put in front of you.
Well, one of the big starting points to all of this, kind of going back to what we've mentioned about some of the incorrect reporting on it, was the basic question of, is this an in-custody death? It was weird how that the reporting was, and the wording of the Sheriff's Department's responses to the request for information was saying that he had died at the hospital. And as I mentioned, the jail records showing he had been released. So I emailed the sheriff back and specifically I said, Sheriff, this is not what I'm asking. I want to ask you, is this an in-custody death? The sheriff responded, yes, which is, I appreciate him being direct about that in response to that question.
Was it pretty much a one-word response?
Yeah.
No surprise there, right?
It wasn't, yes, it was. I mean, it clearly wasn't a detail that they wanted to broadcast or to be the headline, but it was the headline to this, you know. And so, initially, with them having turned over the case to Arkansas State Police, we sent records requests to state police. At the end of the year, their public information officer, Bill Sadler, retired, and a new one was put into place. Forgive me for not knowing her name, but we had, I believe that perhaps I had not received responses to my request because of that, because they went to somebody that had retired. So I sent them to the new public information officer and still haven't received anything back.
When did you send those?
December.
December, and you still have not. So you sent a Freedom of Information Act request, and you still have not got a response.
In December, and then to the new one in January. That's correct.
Wow.
And so, and generally, I have always received a response from Arkansas State Police, even if it's we can't help you with that record, it's sealed, it's not available, whatever.
Usually what you would get is, even if they can't provide you records, they would either say, A, we have no records responsive to your request, or B, we have them, but here's the exemption under the law where we're not releasing them.
Right.
You're not even getting that, though. Is that correct?
We're getting, no response at all. And so, you and I have spoken previously, and you had actually shared some of your contacts with me at State Police. So I have sent, this past week, I sent several new records requests directly to some of the people involved, more involved with the investigatory process. And we're hopeful that maybe there will be something there. At the same time, there was also a feeling, and the family kind of thought this too, they're waiting, if they've been waiting on the death certificate and the exact cause of death, presumably the autopsy, perhaps that's what has held up state police. But
that shouldn't hold them up on responding to a lawful request.
Well, and it shouldn't hold them up on if a person was obviously beaten to death in pursuing justice for that person. I mean, if everything we can tell, there was no doubt as soon as he got to the hospital that he had been beaten to death. But no arrest, no anything like that had been announced. So if they did want to wait for that, it is a bit of an unusual, I don't want to say excuse, reason perhaps, but
well, what they should do is, and this is one of my passions, as you know, on transparency in government. And when you send a freedom of, and just so the folks out there know, when you send a freedom of information request, they are mandated by state law to acknowledge that request. And actually, they're to, within 24 hours, acknowledge your request, and if the records aren't readily available, they're to give you a date and time, which should be within 72 hours, a date and time when those records will be made available. That's state law. To not even get a response or anything like that is just beyond ridiculous, especially when we're talking about a case like this where family members are needing to know something. I understand completely about not going into anything that might compromise the investigation or release information that may lead to compromise an investigation, but just to not respond to a lawful request is unacceptable. But apparently that's what you're getting, right?
yes, the lack of response, the silence, as I wrote, has been deafening. We're getting nothing from them. We're hopeful this week, maybe to get in the next several days some type of response, since I did send out these new requests to several different individuals, and we're also going to try to circle back around with the jail and get jail records. You have some experience in that with your work in Lonoke County and in Central Arkansas and elsewhere, which you're doing a great job, by the way. I've got a lot of explained probably many times to your audience before, the jail records should be releasable. They should show whether or not he was checked. And, the mandated inmate checks were performed. We're hopeful to get that. It's the one thing I will say. We have a new prosecutor here since this year began. A lot of new officials.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
And her name is Sonia Fonticello, and I really hope I said her name correct, because I asked her to specifically train me on how to say it. I'm from Pocahontas. Our names are simple: Jones, Balls.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But anyway,
yeah.
So she has told me that she is closely following the case and awaiting state police their report on it, which suggests to me that they've not completed it yet. Obviously, I don't think there's any doubt in my mind, at least, that she will be transparent. She does seem to bring a sense of service to the public, to the job that was not previously there. The previous prosecutor was appointed because of an election for the other one. Anyway, I think that she's going to handle it seriously. The question is, when is it going to get her to be able to do something about it? And we don't have an answer on that.
No, and the state crime lab stays backed up. That's just a reality. They stay backed up, and my gosh, if you'll think back to just something like the shooting that at the time Little Rock PD Chief Keith Humphrey was involved in December 31st of 2021, just to get the toxicology and the things back from the state crime lab was what held everything up. And what was it, like 6-7 months before they even got the stuff to the prosecutor to look at. And so that's a big problem we face, and it's very frustrating to crime families, to victims of crime and their families. It's very frustrating because a lot of times investigators have to wait months to get things from the state crime lab, which I feel like that's a lot of what's going on here. You would think you would get answers quick, but there's just such a backlog in that. And when this started, and you were sending FOI requests to Sheriff Franks as well, though, right?
Well, yes, and he cited that throughout the process that he could not, that the investigation was in the hands of Arkansas State Police, so he couldn't release any further information about it. I haven't submitted, and to be transparent, I don't believe I submitted specific FOI request to him for the jail record before he left office.
So basically, where the family is sitting, where we're all sitting, is we are waiting on this investigation to be closed and the file to be sent to the prosecutor.
Yes, or for Arkansas State Police to announce that they found something that is previously unknown about this case. Mm-hmm. It's in the answer stage. We're looking for answers, and I guess that means we're still in the question stage. But the family doesn't have answers, and they are hoping that state police finish their element of this, which may be, like I said, if this was an autopsy that was just completed, my hope is this is what was the holdup. But Arkansas State Police, they do have a wide purview over a lot of land and area to cover, and so that being the case, I mean, there is they're pretty methodical in their approach, and I'm glad they are in a sense, because the last thing anybody wants is for a criminal charge not to stick because the T's weren't crossed and the I's weren't dotted. And so I appreciate
that on that end, but hopefully this is going to get to the prosecutor soon. What will happen is the Arkansas State Police, when they finish their investigation, they will send their file to the prosecutor. Their Arkansas State Police is probably not going to say a word about it. They're just going to hand the football off, and then it's going to be up to the prosecutor at that point. And we're hoping that happens sooner than later. It's Stan, how frustrating is it for the family to, in the sense that they know that she knows her father was beaten to death. I mean, I think you said it. We can all say that, okay? But how frustrating is it to sit back and know that, but not know who, what, when, how?
Well, it makes it really difficult for them to accept that when you see cases where a murder takes place in the community and there's an arrest 5 hours later, for example. The family knows that there are instances, regular instances, where when something bad happens, criminal to someone, the police act immediately. They don't feel like that's happening here, and it's hard to argue with that point or with that feeling that they have. There's a hopelessness. I think the exact quote was that she gave me, the daughter, this week, was that she feels like she's climbing a mountain and they just started climbing it. Mm-hmm. And that they have this whole, peak of Mount Everest ahead of them to try to find answers and to try to find justice. So that's frustrating. There's an element of, concern that the family has, and I hope that it's unwarranted, but there's an element of concern that they have on if state police will find answers or if they will not. I believe they have the state police have an office inside the Greene County Sheriff's Department, and I think that was a detail that made the family paranoid. And again, it's hard to argue with a family that just lost somebody in police custody that you don't have anything to worry about the system. It'll take care of you, because it hasn't so far.
I cannot look a family in the eye and tell them that their paranoia is not justified because of what they've gone through and what they're going through. And so, yes, when you're sitting there, you're not getting answers, you're nobody's talking to you, then why would you have faith?
Well, think about this too, because I know this is unrelated, but at the same time, their feelings are very related. They're watching on TV, and video comes out of 5 Memphis officers beating Tyree Nichols to death. That was an emotional trigger for Julian Jones and for her family, because in that moment, they are seeing the worst nightmare come true, law enforcement murdering someone. And that fear is in their mind. Was this something that happened because of an inmate? Or was this a detention officer or someone that was employed there? And again, I can't look them in the eye and tell them you have nothing to worry about, that, because...
No, you can't. And it is frustrating because you take the Memphis case, okay? It happened, internal investigation, criminal investigation. The officers got charged. As soon as the officers got charged, the camera footage came out.
Yes.
And so this family's case, they're going, how could that happen so quickly, yet this is still dragging along? And I think that would be the family's biggest frustration in that sense. Am I making sense?
Absolutely. That is exactly a frustration. And there's probably so many more that we can't even imagine, because there's so many thoughts going through their mind when they see this. But, she says she looked at that and she's imagining if that's what happened to her dad. And those injuries that he had, whatever happened to her dad was not far from that.
I can tell you this, just using common sense, okay? And this is what I want to talk to you about next. But if this would have been at the hands of an inmate, then I think we would have already seen charges. And
I'm so glad you said that, Jimmy. I think we'll enter into a new level of our conversation here.
yeah,
I am in agreement with that. And the thing about that is that jail has a murderer that is somebody that's murdered an inmate and that's not been punished for it at all. And that is an inmate. Let's say that the person that did the murder is an inmate. Something needs to be done about that. Something should have been done about that already.
well, there would be enough evidence to make that charge, and I contend there's enough evidence right now to make a charge. But I just think the reality is if this was at the hands of an inmate, you would have already, you yourself would be reporting, hey, inmate so and so has been charged in the death of Mr. Price.
I'm not sure if this is journalistic or not, but I wonder if I might read a comment to you that I received from a viewer.
Yes, please do.
The comment, I'm not going to mention your name, but it's at NEA report, so I suspect you didn't use your real name for safety. The comment says, quote, "He didn't do it himself. Ask the inmates no longer there and at risk for retaliation. The guys locked up with him, raised the alarm many times trying to get him help." Now, that's one of the many statements.
That's kind of a common theme with the death of John David Mackey in the Lonoke County Jail, is that it was inmates saying this guy needs help, in telling the deputies and jailers that, which fell on deaf ears. But going back to this, there's a criminal investigation going on by the Arkansas State Police, but what a lot of people don't realize is there is also an internal investigation going on within the sheriff's department that is done by that department. So when this happens, Steve Franks obviously opened an internal investigation into what happened in his jail. What are you getting on that investigation?
Nothing. And they're going to, Green County is one of the more difficult counties to get records from in Northeast Arkansas. They're not very transparent. And at one point in time, their county attorney was giving them bad advice that they didn't have to release any type of report when it was FOIA, even an incident report that was not under investigation. They're in desperate need, to be honest, of a lawsuit up there against them by a journalist. It may be me, maybe you, maybe somebody else, to set them straight that they need to release records that are releasable, but they don't have ownership over them. But the reality is nothing. I've got nothing from them on that, and I suspect that it would be the answer to that would be the same as when I requested before, that it's under state police investigation and you have to go through them. A lot of passing the buck, as they say.
Right, and there is a clause in the Arkansas Freedom of Information Act under, not to bore people, but under 2519-105B6 that says, if it's an ongoing investigation, it's exempt until the investigation is closed. And the internal investigation, even if it's still ongoing, there are several things that are still, and you and I talked about it, that are do not fall under that exemption, like dispatch records, jail logs. And here's the thing that people don't realize, and Lonoke County Sheriff John Staley fought me on it, and we proved it, that the video cameras in the jail are a log. And so footage inside the jail is exempt from that ongoing investigation clause. And that's what drives people like John Staley and no longer Steve Franks is no longer there, but would drive them nuts because trying to get that video before it runs out of retention. Some videos, they all have their own retention policies, right? And so what happens if it's 60 days? What happens after 60 days? And they go, oh, we don't have it anymore. And so for the people to know that those records are obtainable, and the Arkansas Supreme Court has ruled on that as far as in Hingle versus Pine Bluff and their umpteen AG opinions on it. And you even alluded to, like, hey, you're asking for something as simple as incident reports that are not part of an ongoing investigation, but they seem to tell you that they don't have to give them to you, right?
Yeah. We've had a lot of issues with Greene County, and it's unfortunate because it was one of my reports that helped Steve Franks get elected. At the time, there was a case where a man had been falsely accused of rape and arrested, and my report came out and exonerated the man. He was at work on camera, and when my report came out, the sheriff at the time determined it, and a free man was released. And because I had reported on that sheriff was voted out of office, and Steve Franks was voted in. One of the reasons.
But you can't make him. You can't make him be transparent. I mean, one of the most frustrating things is that when you have people that are dishonest or unethical, it's hard to get accountability because the way the laws are designed, frankly, to protect politicians. The politicians that put these laws into place to hold themselves accountable also put the laws in there that there's virtually no accountability.
Yeah, they do. There's a lot of protections in place to where people can claim that they weren't being intentionally malicious, but they were just reckless, and they get off.
Yeah, it's just.
We had hoped with Steve Franks, because he came into the office basically riding a desire and a need for transparency. We had hoped that he would be different, and I can tell you now that his term is complete, that he was a tremendous disappointment. But
do you have high hopes for the new sheriff?
Well, they're higher than they were. I had lost all hope with Mr. Franks, and I hate to say that because at one point I hoped that he and I could be good friends, and we are Facebook friends. But I have matter of fact, Brad Snyder, the new sheriff. Yes, let me say that it's unfair for me to say anything other than yes. I do have high hopes because he was somebody that has wanted that job, that got it, that could show us all how a great law enforcement officer conducts a department, and we should always be hopeful for that.
Yeah.
Until there's a reason not to, I do have hope in him, but.
Yeah, and I've been clear too over time, I know you are too. We don't want to brand every sheriff or police chief or law enforcement administration in the state as being corrupt or unethical, dishonest. That's not true. We have so many that are wonderful, so we don't want to brand that or paint with a broad brush. We're talking about these individuals.
I think a lot of times what happens is people that don't want to be accountable try to say that those of us holding our officers to a higher standard, they try to brand us as anti-police, and nothing could be further from the truth.
Sure.
I'm not. I'm probably, if anything, pro-police or biased toward the police, because in 98% of the videos and the reports and stuff that I review that they do report, they're in the right, and they're doing their best, and often they are doing good for the I mean, there's some institutional mistakes, and there's some laws that shouldn't be laws that we could fix, but you can't expect a beat cop to go pass a law in the legislature.
No,
So,
no, you're exactly right. And the reality is there are bad police officers, there's bad doctors, there's bad lawyers, there's bad nurses, there's bad school teachers, there's bad news reporters, right? And,
yep.
but that doesn't paint the entire professions as
No.
being bad. It's just those tend to get a lot of spotlight, and they should. This should get spotlight. This should
But
be
if you,
because we expect
if you
more.
look at what happened in Memphis, for example, because I know we mentioned that once, the swiftness that they responded to what happened and the charges that were brought immediately, I have, even though that was the worst video I think I've seen in a long time,
That was bad.
I had hope from early on in that because the department seems to have decided now we have zero tolerance for this incident, and so I know that there's debates about others should be charged and whatnot, but they fired and arrested 5 officers for murder. I think instances like that show and that it is instance of a bad apple and not a bad orchard.
Yes.
And when you have instances where officers are less than willing to perhaps charge or investigate other officers, I understand that feeling, but it needs to be charged.
Well, it paints a picture that that sometimes gets brushed across the entire profession, and it doesn't help good officers. It doesn't help good sheriffs, good police chiefs when those things happen. When those people in those positions act in that manner. When Sheriff Franks acts the way he did, it makes the job of every other sheriff in the state of Arkansas harder. Does that make sense?
Well, yes. And when you look at every law enforcement agency in Arkansas, one of their main, or in any place, one of their main focuses and missions is community outreach. It's building a relationship with their community. And whether it's building a trust or keeping that trust, that's important to any police department, and I think any police department's leader will tell you that. And nothing hurts that effort more than when a bad actor does something outside of the realm of what they should be doing, like this.
Sure.
And then, we're in this period now to where, look, I mean, we may find out next week or next month that somebody's charged and justice is served, and it just took a while. And if that happens and this story is written in that way and it's in the end, that's good. But we're in that period now to where we're waiting for answers and waiting for action, and that's what's the hardest for the family because they lose hope, and sometimes we do too. But like you said, you gotta keep some level of hope that things are going to go well, and I can't be deliberately cynical. So
Right. No, I get it. And this story, I'm glad to talk to you today about it because this story needs to be statewide, and it needs to be heard. And it's a horrific death that it's so important that we get the answers to this. It's so important for the public to get the answers to this. And I can already go ahead and tell you, folks, when it's all said and done, what you're going to hear is going to be bad. It's going to be bad, but you need to hear it. And that's where Stan does a really good job in that I'm going to brag on Stan for a minute and his organization. If you go to it, it's really objective, which is what a lot of the Little Rock news agencies, KTV Channel 7, THB 11, even Channel 4, KARK, and Fox 16, have all lost that objectivity in bringing you facts. And Stan does a really good job of that with his organization, Northeast Arkansas Reports. I really want to encourage you guys, go to their Facebook page, sign up for their link, start keeping up with them. Uh, they're going to tell you the facts. If it's not going to be so much of an opinion piece, Stan's going to give you, here are the facts, here's what you need to know. And if it's good, Stan's going to tell you it's good. If it's bad, he's going to tell you it's bad. But that's what you want. That's what you want. Now, before we get going here, Stan, you've got something kind of big coming up. Is that correct?
It's right around the horizon, yeah, and I don't mind sharing that here with your audience as well. And thank you for the nice words, by the way. I appreciate that. Coming from you, it means a lot because I think everybody that follows you, and a lot of the people that are following me who have reached out to me. Somebody yesterday reached out to me and they said, "Hey, Stan, by the way, have you heard Jimmy Cannon?" You're never going to believe who I'm recording a show with. That level of honesty and that makes itself well known and it's appreciated. And yeah, I'm not going to tell anybody what they should believe. You don't need to know what my politics are because I'm just a dude that doesn't, like anybody, can be wrong about anything. But what I will tell you is what the facts are, and I'll let you make up your own opinion. And if that confirms a bias on the left or on the right, I don't care. All I care about is the facts.
Yeah.
And one thing I love about Arkansas is that Arkansas is not big on government corruption. And so, generally speaking, I think the audience goes with that well. Yeah, so back to something.
Yeah, this is exciting.
In December, ABC News 2020 came to town and filmed a 2-day interview with me, and with a bunch of other people too, about a really crazy case. This is international level of crazy. A young lady grew up in Jonesboro, Arkansas, and ended up in Playboy, amongst other modeling organizations. She moved to California and murdered her sugar daddy. Summarizing a lot of events in one sentence here, but she was charged and took a guilty plea, an Alford plea, and she has now 25 years, I believe, of a sentence, although she'll get out before that. Anyway, she murders her sugar daddy, that it comes out to find that her mother was also involved with it. It's a wild story. Like every time you peel back a layer, there's another weird layer to this story. And so ABC is producing a special for 2020 on it. And it's supposed to air sometime in the early portion of this year. I think it was going to air last month until one of the producers told me until I guess there was the tragedy that happened, I believe, in Idaho. Mm-hmm. And, so I know it's coming up. I don't have the exact date for it yet, but I think before the next several months, maybe sooner. And we'll tell your audience. I'll tell you whenever we get a date so we can share that. But you're going to see on 2020 a story that probably, again, this is another story that has not been covered really here. And the reason they came to interview me in a city where they have an ABC News affiliate and they didn't go interview them is because I was the only one that covered it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that to boast. I'm saying that because that's sad.
I agree. That's really sad.
We need to be doing a better job. Put all of this on the shoulders of just a single person or a single individual or a single business even is unfair. And so it is just it's the type of story where I think people will really think it's interesting and wild, and at the same time you get a close-up look at Arkansas, especially Northeast Arkansas, where she was at and where she grew up. So that's coming up, and we'll let everybody know once we find a date. But if you're a 2020 viewer and you just check it out, usually pretty regularly, you'll probably see that before too long. So.
Yeah, and when it does, I'm gonna put it out on my pages and everything to see. And yeah, and I will make a real quick comment. What you're saying about the news media is absolutely correct. When we talk about what the media is done, and you said the statement, it's just sad, and it is sad, and I say it all the time. I don't have a college degree. I didn't go to journalism school. Hell, I can't even spell journalism. Okay, and but I make the point all the time is what's a sad state of affairs when people have to come to Jimmy Cabin to get some news and facts, and they can't really go to the mainstream media for it. And I make that all the time. How sad a state of affairs is that? And that's why you folks in Northeast Arkansas and you folks all over the state really need to pay attention to Northeast Arkansas reports. You're gonna get some reporting that the others just aren't really doing, and they're looking. Other news organizations, sad to say, are just looking for quick hit headlines and tweets.
Correct.
And I think investigative journalism has really gone downhill, and Stan is not going down that road. Stan is going to hold fast to doing true investigative journalism, and that's what we're looking for.
When you're a reporter and when you're working at a TV station, because I did used to long ago, it is very easy to want to be public relations for government agencies and just report the good stuff they tell you. Because you can show up to work and copy and paste, and you really don't have to take any risk.
Well, you don't have to work, right?
And you don't have to work.
Yeah.
You're not going to make anybody mad, and you can just post on, get you a nice marketing job after you get out. But if you want to be a real journalist, you bring truth to power, and you're not there to be friends with these people. The reality is, none of the people that work in government are going to be your friend when you quit being a reporter. I know that because I stopped for a while and all of them quit returning my calls. They taught me a great lesson because when I came back and they started returning my calls again, I already knew what the bullshit was.
Well, yeah.
And you, as a reporter, you, Jimmy, get it right. You are not putting reports out to make friends. You're obviously not putting them out to make enemies. You're putting them out to tell the truth. But telling the truth about people that do things wrong will make you a lot of enemies.
Oh gosh, I mean, which is fine with me. Everybody knows me. I don't care. Give me your best shot. I get death threats. I get everything. I don't care. That doesn't faze me a bit. I say this, Stan, and there's probably people that say this about you, or that feel this way about you. But I say there's a whole list of people that every day the first thing they do is get the newspaper and go to the obituary section to see if my name's in it.
Oh, yeah. I'm telling you, when I have a funeral, there's going to be a cheering section.
Yeah, exactly. And that's good because the reality is if you're in the profession that you're in, Stan, and you're not pissing people off, then you're not doing your job.
Correct. There's no way to be a good reporter and not piss people off.
Yeah.
You just have to. You can be a compassionate and caring person, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about when you report something that a bad person did. Generally speaking, bad people don't take accountability for their actions.
No.
And usually they attack the messenger. And so I think that I would love to see Arkansas unite behind more independent citizen journalists like that. I feel like that we kind of carved out a niche for ourselves because newspapers are going away completely. Jonesboro doesn't have a daily newspaper anymore, and editors are even based out of Jonesboro.
Yeah, everything's going digital.
Everything's going digital, and everything is going into, like, all these corporations are buying up smaller newspapers, and they're consolidating to save money. But what that does is lower the quality of news. You have less reporters, and the ones you have are getting paid the lowest amount possible. So, anytime I think somebody sees an independent citizen journalist out there, even if they are politically, if their personal political beliefs are not the same, or if they are, Man, that is such an important thing to support because I guarantee you that person is getting answers. They're making the people in charge hold themselves to a higher standard, and they're probably getting a million bad messages. So an occasional nice one would go a long way.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely,
And
absolutely.
to my wonderful followers' credit, they are incredible. I have some amazing people that really cheer the work on and support the work, and that's what it's about. It's not about me. I don't even like to put my name on the stories, but we do it. It's about making the world better and about the people having the power in the country. You know?
Well, it's right and wrong. It's right and wrong, and you know you're gonna do the right thing and put the facts out. And you know I'm gonna finish up with this, guys. Is Stan. One thing I really drew me to Stan is he's a lot like me. Is when Stan puts the facts out there, there are going to be people that don't like what he's saying, but they can't dispute it. And I think that's the big key. And I think the reason that they get mad is because they can't dispute it. And so I want you guys to follow Northeast Arkansas Reports. Keep up with Stan. He does a great job. And, buddy, I appreciate you coming on. And we're going to get you back on as the story progresses. Is that okay?
I'd love to come back and chat with you some more, and maybe come back and we'll talk once the 2020 episode airs.
Man, that sounds great. Thanks, Stan.
Thank you, sir.
All right, guys, that was Stan Morris, Northeast Arkansas Reports. Like I say, want you guys to follow him. He's doing a great job, and we really appreciate you listening in today.